Before I get on to the sermon, whilst we're in this school, I thought I'd put out an appeal. We need school governors. In particular, we need school governors from the Christian community of this place. We need what are called foundation governors. At the moment, it's just me. Our other foundation governors have had to step back. The school governing body can't meet without foundation governors, and I retire in a couple of months. So we need governors from you, the Christian folk in Wheatley. If you're at all interested, please have a word with me afterwards, and I'll make sure that you get to talk to the right people. Well, it's very good to be together, demonstrating our unity and praying for it. The Week of Prayer for Christian Unity began in 1908 with some high church Anglicans in Rome celebrating a daily Eucharist for unity. Well, the idea took off, and over 100 years later, we are still in the process of understanding each other and in growing in fellowship. It's not easy, is it, when you have such a great diversity of practice and theology, and there's still much more that we can do. Our Bible passages today from Genesis and Luke are familiar to anyone who's been reading their Bible or been involved in church. Two stories about hospitality and care for strangers. In Genesis, Abraham and Sarah, confronted with three strangers, offer them hospitality, sparing nothing to show them the sort of welcome that is a feature of Middle Eastern culture. Over the Christian centuries, we have read into this story an understanding that the three strangers were the Holy Trinity. In the passage, the three are sometimes referred to in the plural and at other times in the singular, adding to our seeing them as the Trinity. In the passage from Luke that we heard, the story of the Good Samaritan, we have a tale told by Jesus of a stranger helping a man in need, not caring about the differences between them, but seeing only a fellow human being in need. So these two stories are about strangers and difference and our response to them. Well, we'll look at each one in a little bit more detail. The passage from Genesis is very interesting. Ask yourself, if three strangers turned up at your place, would you do what Abraham and Sarah did? Would you kill the metaphorical fatted calf and make sure that they ate their fill before sending them on their way? Now, I'm sure that there are some amongst us who have that gift of hospitality in them. But I think our British way tends to be a little bit more protective of our space, and we tend to be a little bit more standoffish. But in the ancient Middle East, and to this day, there is a culture of hospitality. I guess when you live a nomadic life, scratching a living wherever you can find it, it is easier to understand the needs of others. You would want others to help you, so everyone helps everybody else. But when I read this passage, I sense an edginess to it. It goes on, the passage, and it's worth reading a bit more of it. It would have been too long this morning. The three strangers have a slightly menacing air about them. Abraham is not at ease with them, and Sarah keeps her distance, staying in the tent. But even in their uneasiness, Abraham and Sarah lavish care on these strangers, even though the conversation is confusing and hints at mysteries to be revealed in a future that they do not see. In Luke, the story of the Good Samaritan is a response to the man's question, "Who is my neighbour?" It is one of Jesus' marvellous short stories that starts on very familiar ground, a journey to Jericho. Everyone in his audience would have known that road. And he draws us in then with a mugging by bandits. Within a line or two, we're completely hooked into the story, feeling sympathy for the poor man who's been left for dead. Jesus' audience would have laughed perhaps at the behaviour of the priest and the Levite, would have scoffed at their lack of compassion. But then the familiar and safe ground is rocked by Jesus introducing a Samaritan to the story. Samaritans were outsiders, not part of the people of Judah. A good Jew would never have consorted with Samaritans, And here in this story, confronted with a man in need, the Samaritan does what all the audience tell themselves they would have done. He helps. He tends the man's wounds and takes him to a place of safety and pays for his care. And so the point is made. Despite our differences, we are all neighbours and we should care for everyone. Well, we could end it there. It's quite a neat summing up, and we're left with a clear and somewhat cosy message that we should all be hospitable and caring towards one another, and even to those who are different from us. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's much more to both of these passages. As I said, Christians have for centuries seen the three strangers in Genesis as being the Holy Trinity. The pronoun used for them keeps flipping between singular and plural, and we're left wondering, how many of them are there? Is it one speaking to Abraham or three? This is an encounter far more profound than just three strangers appearing out of the desert, like a scene from Lawrence of Arabia. And the real generosity that we find in the story is not Abraham and Sarah's. They were just doing what was normal and accepted. The real generosity is God's. Abraham and Sarah are childless, they long for a family, and here God promises that in their advanced years, Sarah will get pregnant and will have a son. It is such a fantastic idea that Sarah, eavesdropping from the tent, laughs, and the strangers rebuke her for it. The gift from God's generosity is more than a son. It is the promise of a dynasty. Abraham will be the father of many nations. The generosity of God to Abraham and Sarah starts the story of God-loving folk that leads to us being here this morning. The message from this is perhaps be prepared to meet God in unexpected strangers. Be hospitable, be generous, and perhaps expect generosity in return, beyond your wildest dreams. Likewise in Luke, the story of the Good Samaritan is about more than an example of how we should behave towards those in need. It is about God's care for us. In the story, Jesus shows that God's love is not just for those in Judea, but for everyone. In Jesus, God sent us a healer to tend our wounds and to nurse us back to life. We are all damaged by life. We all bear the scars and pains, both physical and emotional and spiritual. Jesus brings healing to all, whether or not we think ourselves worthy. And quite frankly, who is? Like the repair shop on TV, the healing of hurts is really about the healing of relationships and the liberal application of love. On the repair shop, the things that are mended represent to their owners the memories of loved ones. The real mending that goes on is in the healing of memories. When all other possible helpers, represented in the story by the Levite and the priest, have failed us, God is there to restore us. When we are helpless, God helps. But hang on a minute, this is all very interesting. But what has it got to do with the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity? Well, first, let me say on this, my last Unity service here in Wheatley, that the ecumenical relationships in Wheatley that I've seen in 12 years as vicar are among the strongest and most fruitful that I have ever seen. The shared mission, the friendships, the relaxed ways in which folk accept that some others do things a bit differently, all this makes for wonderful witness to the love of God. If you want to see hospitality like that shown to Abraham and Sarah, you will find it in so many events run by the churches of Wheatley. If you want to see care and healing taking place, you will find it in the Christian folk of Wheatley. As Church of England vicar in this place, it is wonderful to feel that I minister to all, not just to St Mary's folk, and that others who are called to minister here likewise can minister across the boundaries that we draw between ourselves, though the boundaries do seem very soft ones to me. There is always more to do, more to learn from one another. There will remain those practices and habits that our churches have which put us as individuals on edge. But learning to live with the edginess, just as Abraham and Sarah had to when the strangers called by, is part of our journey together. As we learn to accept our differences, we grow closer together. Thank you for being a wonderful collection of Christian folk in Wheatley. Whoever is the next vicar at St Mary's will be richly blessed by you, and I pray that you will be blessed by them as well. Never stop looking for the opportunities to be hospitable and caring, for in them you will find God, the unexpected stranger. Amen.